Hey, Moneymakers, welcome back to another episode of Taking Stock Live. We're bringing you all the latest business news and telling you how it will affect you and your money. So things are getting heated in Iran and the Middle East, and we're going to be talking tonight about how this may affect us in the Caribbean, depending on certain factors. So you know it will. Once the U.S. sneezes, the Caribbean catches a cold. So it go. And all the way over in Iran, repercussions can happen here. So that's going to be our main discussion. And then later on in the program, during the analyst segment, we'll be talking about some common mistakes that small businesses make. But first, I want you to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and let me know in the chat what part of Jamaica or what part of the world you're joining us from. Now, up next, we've got What's Hot in Business. And come on, let's get this money.
But first, here's What's Hot, brought to you by JMMB Group, your best interest at heart.
Time now for What's Hot. General Accident Insurance closed 2025 with its strongest profit performance ever. This happened even though Hurricane Melissa pushed the December quarter into an underwriting loss. Profit after tax was up 61% from $248 million to $400 million. Insurance revenue grew 13.5% to $13 billion. The Development Bank of Jamaica says it will launch its $10 billion M5 business recovery program in the upcoming financial year. The initiative is designed to help businesses affected by Hurricane Melissa restore operations and rebuild capacity. The program will mix grants, concessional loans, and blended financing. It targets agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, and health, all crucial sectors for employment and export growth. Jamaica's passport just got a little bit stronger as citizens no longer need a visa to visit short trips to Brazil, for short trips. Brazil has announced that short-term visa requirements have been waived for citizens of 8 countries, including Jamaica. The waiver took effect on February 24. It allows Jamaican citizens access to Brazil for short-term tourism or business without a visa for 30 days, but this can be extended to 90 days. The move is expected to boost tourism and business travel, potentially unlocking greater regional business linkages and investment flows for Jamaican professionals and companies. Oil prices surged on Monday as U.S. President Donald Trump signaled that the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran would potentially be drawn out for longer than a few weeks. The United States and Israel launched strikes against Iran last week. The cost of Brent crude oil, which is the international oil benchmark, surged 7% on Monday. Iran's oil production is estimated to be less than 5% of global output, most of which goes to China. But because of U.S. sanctions, it has major influence over the Strait of Hormuz, a critical passageway for more than 20% of the world's daily oil demand. That's What's Hot in Business.
What's Hot was brought to you by JMMB Group, your best interest at heart.
Are you interested in buying land or property? Here are the steps you should follow. Step 1. Find out who is legally authorized to sell the property. Step 2. Ensure all property tax payments are up to date. Step 3. Consult an attorney at law who will guide you through the process and protect your interests. You can also use eLand Jamaica to check on matters pertaining to your property purchase. For more information, contact the National Land Agency at 876-750-5263 or 876-946-5263. Email asknla@nla.gov.jm or message us on WhatsApp at 876-418-5089. The National Land Agency. One agency, one goal to serve you better.
Welcome back. Let me see who's in the house tonight. We've got Dwight joining us from Spanish Town. Dwight says he's here most of the times. That is absolutely true. And you're the first comment for tonight. Dwight wants to know, I would like to know if this is the time to buy more Fesco or if the war will be short-lived. Only Trump knows, huh? Javon says, good night, warriors. I hope we've been stocking up our bunkers. We've got Orville joining us from Spanish Town. Ingrid is checking in from Bull Bay, St. Andrew. Azancor is in Kingston 6, Jamaica. Balanta says, Wagwan family. We've got Raquel saying good night to the moneymakers. You know, Raquel is our like police. Nick is saying greetings hailing from the Rock. And we've got Patricia, who is a Jamaican in Bermuda. Unbothered wants to know who saw the eclipse this morning. I missed it, and I was outside. I was outside this morning early, and I didn't know there was an eclipse. It's not till this afternoon somebody told me. So I guess I just didn't look up. I missed it, but hopefully, you know, you guys saw it. You can let us know what that experience was like. Was it nice? How did it look? Let me know. Okay, so over the weekend, the United States and Israel conducted military strikes in Iran, and they killed several Iranian leaders, including the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And we've already seen the reaction in global oil prices. As a matter of fact, prices jumped as much as 10% yesterday, Monday. But how is this going to affect us here in the Caribbean? If it will affect us at all. Tonight, we're having that discussion with journalist and taking stock analyst David Rose. Welcome back to the show, David.
Oops. Night, Kalila.
All right. Good to have you back on. So for those who may not be following the situation closely, what is at the center of the current conflict between the U.S. and Iran, and why is it escalating now?
So basically, there's always been a divide between the Islamic world versus Israel. So for those who don't know, a good chunk of the Islamic world does not recognize Israel as an existing state. So put it this way, most international community recognize Jamaica as a country, independent state. For a lot of the Islamic world, they don't recognize Israel as an existing independent state. To the extent that international sports or events, the members of Islamic designations like Iran and a couple other countries cannot shake hands or partake in events with Israelis. So there is some level of historic and ideological background from that perspective. And in the case of USA, they're close aligned with Israel to the extent that they provide a lot of military support each year to Israel to maintain their relative homogeny in the Middle East. So on the weekend, we would have seen a conducted airstrike and attack between the USA and Israel on Iran. So just to get a little bit of context, under the Obama administration, which was about 2014, there was the Iran nuclear deal whereby Iran agreed to not enrich uranium and other elements of nuclear material past a particular level, and they were to get back into the international financial system and sell some amount of oil. Now, when Donald Trump came back around, well, when he was first elected, that deal went away in 2018 and reached here today, whereby Iran is under tremendous stress. They're cut off from the international financial system. They were trying to find different ways to survive, and in this case, it did not it didn't match the preferences of Israel and USA, and they finally took out, a lot of senior leaders, in this case, one of them being Ayatollah Khamenei. So why is this a problem? So at a point in the Middle East called the Strait of Hormuz, so you have the Gulf producing states such as Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and a couple other countries that produce oil in that particular basket or region. And most of that oil travels by sea, by a straight, narrow way, or body with water.
Right.
So what's happening?
So, as we mentioned in What's Hot just now, Iran only produces about 5% of the world's oil, but it controls critical access to that Strait of Hormuz.
So it's not necessarily about control per se. So no one country has control of the actual strait. It's more so
influence is the better word.
So here's the issue. You're treating them physically closed more so as policy has dictated. So when goods are being shipped, through the Strait of Hormuz, whether oil or other commodities, they have to take out insurance with international insurers. Now, there's a London and other insurers are like, hey, we're not going to insure you to go through this region based on the risk we perceive right now. So you've seen Maersk and a lot of other international shipping companies say, hey, we're suspending the passage of fleets of cargo and ships through that region because there's no insurance. And you've also seen in recent times whereby there have been retaliatory strikes by Iran with some of their neighbors in the Middle Eastern region, which has seen persons in Dubai and other Gulf states who thought they were safe scrambling to leave the country, as an effective shutdown of airspace in that region. So like Dubai's international airport, which is the world's largest international airport by traffic, effectively shut down this airspace because of the situation. And apart from that situation of airspace being shut down, you have oil in turn being choked off. And we should recall that ever since the Russia-Ukraine war, Europe has tried to find alternatives to diversify away from, Russian oil. One of those alternatives being the Gulf states. But one of the advantages that Russian oil provided was that it came through a pipeline, very standardized, and went via a very simple channel on the land. The oil has to come to Europe now, cost a little bit more. And on top of that, the alternative energy means, which is less nuclear and more natural gas alongside renewables, cannot meet the reality or demand that the continent needs right now.
Is this a repeat of what we just saw in Venezuela? Well, they didn't bomb Venezuela. That would be the major difference, I guess.
So it's a lot more complicated now because whereas, Venezuela's oil is part of the whole discussion right now, the assets are still there. There is no international disruption to commerce. It's an entire different reality right now in terms of the impact to the average everyday person, because last 5 years we've seen oil prices, I believe it's Brent crude futures for April delivery, go up 15%. So what does that mean? So futures contracts simply mean I agree to pay you at a defined price in the future. If I buy the contract with that $6 worth of a price I buy it at, but with that strike price is the price I agree to pay when delivery comes due. When conflict arises, the price of oil goes up, especially depending on what kind of conflict it is. So in this case, we're seeing delivery for April go up to about $73, $74. Now, it's not as severe or as sharp as the Russia-Ukraine situation, but the 50% increase is still additional costs that are going to be passed on in short order. And the issue is you don't know how deep this crisis can continue to worsen.
And that's the thing. So like you mentioned, oil prices have already started to rise since the conflict began. Do you think this is this just the initial shock, or will these prices continue to rise?
It's hard to say because you just have a lot of variables that you cannot detect or control at the moment. So put in context, you mentioned Iran is about 5% of the world's oil to China. That's not the biggest issue. The bigger issue is you have a massive conflict and disruption happening in the Middle East. And we have a situation whereby a lot of the senior leaders in Iran are, in this case, no longer alive. So you have a potential regime change, which is compounded by, just what I'd call continued secondary conflict taking place in the environment. So, we saw Spain refuse recently to facilitate US, machinery and other elements to be used on their continent to support the continued attacks in Iran. And, President Trump wasn't happy with that development. And we can also look at the fact that right now, it's not a case of, all right, boom, things get back to business as usual by tomorrow. No, there's a disruption that takes place, and that snaps when the natural order of business snaps, especially when it comes on supply chain and commodities and even just business. It's a lot of time to really snap back into place. So let's get into context, right? Dubai International Airport. When you have planes, having to divert and choose longer routes to reach your destination that cost more in fuel, that cost more gas, so you have greater consumption in the aerospace. the text segment. Then in this case, you also have different oil reaching destination. And you to say even if there was stability by Saturday, those oil prices remain elevated for some time because those risks that are set up in terms of the risk premium that exists because of the disruption don't immediately evaporate immediately. They stay there and take time to come off as well. So the real impact and even just the potential reduction in prices again is going to be dependent on so many factors that you just cannot control because
let's talk some
tomorrow,
numbers. Let's talk some numbers, David. So realistically, how high could we potentially see it go? Because it's around what, $70 right now?
It's around like 73, 74, but it could easily go past 80, as high as 100 if it gets extremely severe, and it really comes down to.
And to put that in context, what is considered high for oil prices?
It depends on context. So in the early 2010s, it was $100 region, $80 region. You would have seen prices come down in the 2014 to 2017 period to the region around $50, $40 region. It spiked again out to Russia, Ukraine, went as high as 120, and it stabilized again back around like the $50, $60 region. So it depends on
100. So 100, 120 is pretty high in global context. And just to let people know as well, so in the 2010s, like you mentioned, when it was between 100, 120, that was a crippling period for the Caribbean. As a matter of fact, that is when many Caribbean countries, Jamaica included, turned to Venezuela and signed the Petro-Caribe deal because oil prices were so expensive that we couldn't afford it. And Venezuela was throwing us this lifeline to get oil at very concessionary terms. And so that became important. So if oil prices hit $100, $120 again, like it did in the 2010s, that could be crippling for many Caribbean economies.
It's even more dire when you think about the fact that even if Venezuela didn't have the change of its known leader, this case being Maduro, there still wouldn't have been an easy situation in terms of trying to alleviate that problem, because what happened around 2017-18 was that the USA imposed sanctions on Venezuela, which limited its ability to do commerce in the international financial space. So for those who don't know, when you use your debit or credit card and you're buying things overseas, that usually goes to the international banking system, which is mainly or predominantly based on the United States dollar. If the USA sanctions you, it becomes a lot more expensive to conduct business and to move and to do commerce. So in turn, if Venezuela wasn't sanctioned right now, there could be some level of alternative to say, hey, Venezuela is here to help us out, but that's not necessarily the case right now. And even if we were to say, hey, we could look to alternatives, Guyana is still relatively scaling up. I don't think, Suriname has started their oil exploration activities as yet. Oil and gas is trying to find oil for Jamaica right now. So it would just be a very difficult period if prices were to really escalate to $80, $90 and stay elevated for 5, 6, 7 months or in a steady period of time. It just gets very expensive to do business.
The Jamaica and most other Caribbean countries are net importers of oil. So how vulnerable are our economies to sudden spikes like this?
So I don't remember the exact methodology, but I know that Petrojam has a particular methodology in terms of how they adjust prices of petrol, on a weekly basis. So every Wednesday, we hear Petrojam adjust the price it offers to the marketing companies when it sells fuel. Now, I recall that Petrojam said that there is a mechanism to limit some of the shock from passing on immediately to the general public. The caveat, though, is I'm not sure, off the top of my head, what's the reference price of what they use at the moment. So essentially, the Brent crude they use as reference price to determine those, price movements, a different methodology based off the US Gulf. So I wouldn't figure right now, but it would be pretty expensive if prices were to stay elevated above $80, $90, for example, for even 3, 5, 3 to 6 months, just because it's not very easy for you to kind of push or absorb some of those shocks if they stay up there for a period of time and tend to come down very slowly.
So when we're looking at potential impact on us here in the Caribbean, including Jamaica, we're looking at not just those direct transport costs, and not only the fuel costs, but electricity bills, because we know that fuel and IPP charges a direct cost on your light bill. We're looking at all the inputs for basically everything rising, because shipping, anything that's imported, that price is going to go up. We're looking at agricultural inputs, those prices going up. We're looking at considerable inflation if this continues along this path.
Tourism as well, Kalila, because you should recall that, back in the 2022 period when, the Russia-Ukraine war started, the USA had some of the strategic oil reserves built up such that they didn't, feel the immediate or deleterious impacts of the oil price shock. I don't recall the USA has really restocked their oil reserves to build against a shock like this again. While they do have some level of control in Venezuela right now, I don't recall, what is really dynamic right now at the moment. But let's put things into context. When prices go up, consumers cut back on discretionary spending. A trip to a Jamaican or a Caribbean destination isn't a trip that one would describe as a necessity, but it's just a discretionary choice. We have seen whereby this winter season was pretty brutal up north, but Jamaica couldn't really capitalize on that, increased traffic flow, to our country because the hotel capacity was down because of the impact of Hurricane Melissa. And we already seen situation in the USA whereby the tariff situation is a little bit in flux. And we also have to recall the fact that, there are the steady job losses taking place alongside the Fed's relatively high in context interest rates. So there are just a lot of factors that, come down as a negative for us, because you mentioned increased input costs. We look at the increase in electricity bills and just all other input costs as well, because one thing that took place in 2022, 2023, which most people realize, when oil prices went up and heat prices went up, distribution costs went up considerably. So like different companies, they had to, increase the amount paid to their drivers to offset that cost. We just heard the government, recently announce its budget package from the revenue measure standpoint. So we saw the potential increase on sugary drinks, cigarettes, and other products. And the reason I mentioned sugars in particular is that if the manufacturer, whether locally or foreign manufacturer, has to be accounting for this increased transport costs alongside sugar drinking tax, it really cuts into the margins for those companies, and in turn can impact the consumer in the end, depending on how much space the company has to absorb those shocks in terms of higher prices. So like we had the USA's 10% tariff to export to the USA. So Nigerian company said, hey, we absorb like 5-6% tariff for other companies that wasn't so flexible. So there are a lot of secondary order effects that you don't really see taking place when these events happen. It is something you have to actually go and talk about in spaces to really see the impact of what's actually taking place.
Are there any potential upsides from what is happening for the Caribbean?
Not necessarily. So
any opportunities that could potentially come out of this crisis, given that we do have some oil exporters in the region?
So putting this into context, and this is why I'm glad to always read Mario Ducaran's content to kind of give more context for the Caribbean. So whereas we do have Trinidad, as an oil producer in some capacity, as she has pointed out, the production volumes that have taken place over the last decade plus have come down considerably. And even in Trinidad right now, we saw whereby they just increased natural gas prices by like 77% for the light industrial and commercial manufacturers or input users. And then even with Guyana being there as, a oil producer at the moment, I'm not sure, where that oil blend, goes, and also, how their own production capacity is impacted right now, because one of the things about one interesting things when it comes on to oil is a mixture of different blends. So you have sour crude, you have heavy, and you use different inputs or blends of oil to balance out your own oil that you sell to the public or to other users. So
Yeah, but if oil prices go up, global prices go up, then that would mean more revenue for those among us who are oil exporters.
So that is true on a net basis. However, there's also the potential caveat and flip side of the equation. So in 2022, for example, Trinidad, they got a massive windfall by higher oil prices, such that they're able to actually build up additional reserves in their heritage and stabilization fund. Now, the flip side of the situation right now is prices in Trinidad have gone up considerably in the last year under the new government in terms of increased national insurance contributions, higher, asset tax in Trinidad now. You have, I mentioned, the increase in natural gas prices. And one of the big constraints now is that we're not in a situation whereby, let us say, Jamaica or the rest of the Caribbean markets that could potentially offset some of those balance are there to really, I try to call, benefit or, consume that actual flow. So it's a pretty dynamic situation. Like, oil is a topic that I really follow, all the time. I think I follow all it in depth all the time, but you do have the upside, as someone would say, like a FESCO, a Regent's Petroleum, or West Indies Petroleum Terminal, or a FESCO.
I'm glad you went there, because that's, we have a lot of investors and business people who watch this program, and they want to know, okay, this is happening. How do I respond? What should investors and businesses be watching in the coming weeks to understand how this conflict could affect them? I already see a comment. Dwight was asking, I would like to know if this is the time to buy more FESCO or if the war will be short-lived.
So, the funny thing is, people always say higher prices are good because it's more revenue, but there's also the flip side of the equation, which is higher prices can also detract consumption. So what do you mean by that? So if I was paying, to say, $150 today for my trip, to pay for my trip worth of, gas usage, and I'd pay $200 tomorrow, I'm gonna have to cut down spending somewhere else. I'm gonna have to try and find alternative means to cut down my traveling by a regular vehicle. So there could be potentially some level of upside for the Tesco's and the RPLs and so on from a revenue reporting standpoint, but it might necessarily translate to increased volumes of petroleum sold to the general public. Because, putting things in context again, the West is still relatively impacted or has seen a decline in consumption over there because of Hurricane Melissa. So you have a person over there in the West, who don't have light as yet. They do not have, the means to travel around as they would before. So on one hand, while the West is down in some capacity, that might lead to some reduced demand from that side on an aggregate basis, but it might not say translate towards, increased fuel consumption and sales for the marketing companies like your FESCO and your Regent's Petroleum. Now, in terms of how you prepare for a situation like this, I recall back in 2022 speaking to some businesses, and I said, if you're in a particular segment business, it's best for you to talk to other competitors and say, hey, how can we, in this period of shock, try and stay afloat? In other words, let us say we are in manufacturing. Can we aggregate together and purchase certain commodities to get better input prices to limit some of those shocks? On the other element side of the equation, how do you increase revenue? So it's going to be based on exports. Is it going to be based on creating new market segments for your business? So in terms of responding to this whole situation, it's about, for one, understanding where your cost inputs are really, really set up. So if you're a manufacturer, electricity costs, your first major concern. What is the potential impact when it comes down to natural gas prices? So like Wusinka, Red Stripe, they are heavy users by natural gas, which is now, supplied mainly by Accelerate Energy, which is formerly owned by the Jamaica operation of Accelerate Energy is owned by New Fortress. Then on the other element side of the equation, we also have the other players, such as, let us say, the manufacturers, chemical input manufacturers. Some of the inputs that they import from other countries, that might take longer for them to receive here in Jamaica. How can we come together, for example, and contact a manufacturer in Europe or America or South America, for example, to reduce those costs, or get better preferential treatment and getting products sent to us? Because a lot of byproducts that we use in our daily life, we don't really think about them when it comes on to how we interact in our daily lives. So we use oils to make plastics, we use oil and other byproducts to make certain chemical inputs which are used in the manufacturing process, grease, and so on and so forth. So
everything.
And don't forget, we have seen in recent times a lot of our manufacturers expand. So Honey Bun with Angels, Carrington today, 40% capacity expansion by Rockford. Usinko, there's similar capacity expansion by White Marl. Red Stripe with their expansion. We saw, I think it was separate and other companies expand their manufacturing capacity as well. So there is some potential for them to really offset the higher costs by just, increasing volume throughput. But it all comes down to what they can realistically sell when you have lower demand. Remember, Jamaica imports lots of food, not necessarily for Jamaicans alone, but for tourists and the tourism space. Later this week, we should get an update on the February traffic numbers by Pacific Airport Group. So we should get some better input into, where things stand right now. And we saw earlier today from Express Catering that Tomorrow the airport, that being Sanctuary International Airport, is still down, and not going to be available for use until it's in 2026. So the lower consumption in the West because of lower business activity plus the reduction in tourism can have some relative net benefit and reduced consumption, but there's also less revenue in that side of the country. So it's a very dynamic situation, and it's just so dynamic because if the USA has to, be chartering vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, that's additional costs to be passed on somewhere. And even that's the case, will there be further escalation of conflict?
Yeah. Wow. A lot to consider. So many things could happen. Thank you so much for giving us some perspective tonight, David.
No problem, Kalila.
Well, of course, we are going to keep monitoring the situation and keeping you up to date. I did a video today, TBL, the bottom line, on this very issue. So you can check that out over on, it's here on YouTube. It's also on Instagram, TikTok, and all other platforms. Now, speaking of oil, tonight's poll question is also about oil. You may have been seeing in the news that there are some murmurs about what's going on in Jamaica. Will Jamaica find oil? What the progress has been in terms of the exploration here offshore. So our poll question tonight is, do you think that Jamaica will become an oil-producing country? Here are your options. A, yes, I think they'll find oil. I hear some people saying they've already found it and they don't want to tell the people. B, no, I don't think they'll find anything. C, I'm not sure. Or other, leave a comment. Do you think that Jamaica will become an oil-producing country? Yes, I think they'll find oil or already have. B, no, I don't think so. C, I'm not sure. Or other, leave a comment. Leave your answers in the chat and make sure you take the poll over on the community tab here on YouTube or where else are we? On Twitter, X, and in tomorrow morning's newsletter, email newsletter. Of course, you can subscribe at getmoneynews.com. Up next is your market recap, and our analyst is standing by. Time now for your market recap, brought to you by mymoneyja.com, the official data partner of Money Media. Get 10% off your subscription with the code MONEYMISSION. The JSE Combined Index was flat in February. 130 stocks traded across the main and junior markets. 62 made gains, 60 lost value, and 8 stayed the same. 597 million shares changed hands on the Jamaican dollar market, valued at $3.4 billion. Now let's see who had February's biggest gains. Cigna's credit investment 8% preference shares was up 29%. to open Monday at $10.99. MPC Caribbean Clean Energy USD gained 27% to start the month at 37 cents US. And Caribbean Assurance Brokers was February's third biggest gainer. The stock gained 21% to start the month at $2.10. On the losing side now, medical disposables and supplies was last month's biggest loser. It's down almost 21% to open March at $1.15. Portland JSX fell 20% to open the new month at $8. And Caribbean Cream was down 16% to open at $1.55. Over on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, the composite index fell 14 points in February. That's 1.5%. National Enterprises was the most traded stock of the month. It opened March at $2.40 TT. Massey was the TTSE's biggest gainer, up 10%, starting the new month at $3.65. On the losing side, Ansa Macal was February's biggest loser, down 13%. Over in the U.S., the Dow Jones and S&P 500 were down about 1% in February, while the Nasdaq slipped more than 3%. At the pumps, the price of 87 gas rose $1.83 in February, while 90 climbed $1.11. On the other hand, the cost of diesel fell $1.64, and low sulfur diesel lost $1.55. In foreign exchange trading, the JMD gained 28 cents against the US dollar in February, closing the month at an average $157.26 to 1 US. The JMD weakened against the Canadian dollar and closed the month at $118.25. However, Jamaica's currency strengthened against the pound and the euro. The JMD closed the month at $213.34 for the pound and $188.26 for the euro. Finally, on the crypto markets, Bitcoin prices fell 8.5% in the last 30 days, trading at $69,383 on Monday. Meanwhile, Ethereum prices dropped 6%, trading at $2,055 on Monday. Market Recap was brought to you by My Money JA, the official data partner of Money Media. How long now have you been saying that you're going to start investing? And all no. Well, the first step is to learn how. I'll walk you through everything you need to know to start investing on the stock market and building wealth. If investing is your 2026 goal, then this is where you start. Go to moneymissionja.com to get started. Let's get this money.
This segment of Taking Stock, The Analyst, is brought to you by JMMB Group, your best interest at heart.
The views expressed in this segment are not necessarily the views of Money Media. This information is for educational purposes only and is not intended as financial advice. Please consult a licensed financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Welcome back. Let's take some of your comments before I introduce our analyst for this evening. So let's see who we have here. Balanta says, Iran is in a similar position as Cuba. Iran has a bottleneck position on the Strait of Hormuz. Balanta again, oil may very well continue to rise, at least due to price gouging by the companies in control. And she or he says $150 per barrel in today's terms is pretty high. Yeah, I gave you the context as to where we were in 2010 when we needed almost a bailout from Venezuela. And if it's heading back there, that's going to spell problems for a lot of us here in the Caribbean. Dwight said, well, asked this already. He wanted to know if now is the time to buy FESCO. We have Oren, who said, responding to the poll question about whether Jamaica will find oil, Oren said, they will find oil, but I'm scared that blessing might be our curse. The oil bullies might start looking on us. And then we have Levine, who says higher per liter cost doesn't translate into higher net profits on a one-to-one basis. Keep in mind that the initial cost of each liter for FESCO, RPL, etc. would already be high. If anything, volumes may dip. That's a good point. When oil prices are high, we do tend to conserve more, to try to use less electricity and less fuel because it is more precious now. It's more expensive. And so conservation efforts may indeed kick in. All right, let's introduce our analyst for this evening. We're switching things up just a bit. She is none other than Group Marketing Manager at JMB, Carrie Ann Stimpson. Welcome to the show, Carrie Ann.
Hey, Kalila. I've never been called an analyst before.
I was going to
So
say,
I
all
love
right, so
that.
let me explain to the audience. We are switching things up in this segment every now and again. So we want to broaden the range of topics that we discuss on this program. I know that we have a lot of entrepreneurs who view this show. And so from time to time, we will be looking at business strategy, entrepreneurial strategy, and things that entrepreneurs can do for their business. And tonight is one of those segments. And so Carrie Ann is one of our, what shall we call you? Analyst is not quite the
Just call me
word.
a subject matter expert, I guess. Based on,
Contributors.
yeah,
Contributors. So
sure,
tonight,
no
Carrie Ann is one
problem.
of our contributors, and we're talking about common mistakes that small businesses are making, Carrie Ann. So what are some of the mistakes that you see that actually slow down business?
Well, first of all, Kalila, thanks again for having me. And this conversation is not just for people who are in business, but we have a lot of people who are thinking about going into business,
Right.
especially when you talk about tough economic times. Melissa would have dealt us a nice proper blow at the end of 2025. I know a lot of people are thinking about either leaving full-time employment, going into their own business, or maybe thinking about starting a side hustle just in case, or to get that extra income. But it's my pleasure just to kind of jump into it. So the first thing that we see a lot of people doing, and this is me, of course, wearing my marketing and business development hat, is that a lot of people, when they think about starting a business, they think about probably just kind of looking around and seeing what's selling or what's working, and they kind of just jump on the bandwagon instead of doing what I like to call niching down. Right? Because the beauty of it is when you talk about going into business, it's really about solving problems for a customer. Right. And if you're going to be jumping on the bandwagon, Jamaicans sometimes have this tendency where, if they say, let's use the analogy, if you have three men on a corner selling coconut or selling pan chicken, and it looks like they're doing a thriving business, they jump on board and say, yeah, man, pan chicken are the thing. And then they set up their own pan chicken stall, not realizing that additional pan chicken means less money to go around from the same consumer that you're trying to sell to. When in truth and in fact, what you should be doing if you want to start a business is looking across the horizon of who you want to serve, finding out what problems do they have to solve, and then answering the question, what can I solve for them in a way that's better than everybody else at the moment?
Okay, it's interesting that you use the pan chicken analogy because my problem is that my belly hungry.
Right. I'm sorry about that.
No, it could be that delivery. So getting access to reliable food, that could be your problem. So I want pan chicken, but I have to leave work and waste time to go and get this chicken. That could be a problem that you solve. That could be your value add as a business.
Exactly. And just to kind of piggyback on that point, which is where niching down comes into play, because niching down is not just about, well, I'm going to be selling pan chicken or not. It's again going back to understanding who it is you want to serve and doing your research, asking the questions. What are the problems that they have to solve? So as you said, Kalila, you love pan chicken, but you're not necessarily crazy about the idea of driving from where you live to the nearest pan chicken man. You're in your house comfortably, you want to relax. Maybe what you're really interested in is not so much I'm a consumer of pan chicken, but I'm a consumer of pan chicken delivery services, right? That's my problem. And maybe when I'm starting up a business, I'm thinking I'm not just going to pitch a pan chicken stall beside the other three guys. I could probably come up with a business idea that says, look, these are some guys selling pan chicken. I can do the delivery service. I don't have to make the chicken, but I can engage them. I have the platform to be able to engage them to get the chicken, to pick it up and deliver it to the consumer who is waiting at home and wants a delivery service only. So that's what it's all about. It's understanding who you want to serve based on the problem that they have to solve and how you can solve it best.
It could even be a less spicy version, because everybody assume pan chicken mean jerk chicken, but
Right.
suppose pan chicken doesn't have to be jerk chicken. It could just be, pan chicken without the jerk.
Exactly.
Not everybody likes spice. Some people would prefer a milder version. So that could be your
Exactly.
thing. So you're now setting yourself apart. That you're doing a
Exactly.
grilled chicken with the smoky flavor, the smokiness, but it's just not so spicy for those who don't like spice.
Exactly. And that point kind of goes into the other aspect of researching and understanding who it is you want to serve, because it's not just about demographics. And a lot of people think, okay, I want to target people who live in this particular area or belong to this particular age group. That's demographic information. And yes, that's important, but psychographics is important. Psychographics goes into things like behavior and mindset and thoughts and taste. So as you say, there are some people who love the idea of eating a grilled chicken, but they prefer the sweet barbecue as opposed to the very
Right.
spicy jerk. And I can decide, well, if all the other if I'm really hell bent because I can cook a good chicken, if I'm going to be on that corner with the other pan chicken guys, well, I'm only going to be specializing in the sweet and spicy or the sweet and sour, the sweet barbecue version of the chicken if everybody else is going in the direction of the spicy jerk, because I know that the psychographics of my target audience really just values the barbecue version, and that's what works for them, and I cook it better than everybody else, and that's what I'm going to go into.
And then there's the customer segment that is in it for aesthetics. So just give me in a pretty box, in a pretty package, and that's what I'm gonna get. You're giving me some ideas. No, no, no. I need to go start my pan chicken business. But carry on. A lot of businesses focus on sales in the early stages, and we know, well, you need sales to make money. But in your experience, what are some other areas that entrepreneurs need to focus on that they often neglect and then end up affecting long-term growth?
So I think one of the things that they neglect, to be very honest with you, because you mentioned the word sales, and I guess as a marketer, I believe that marketing actually comes first, right? And when we talk about what businesses need to be doing at first, I mean, we spoke about the need to research to identify who it is you want to serve, assessing whether or not they are a viable enough market to serve, because sometimes you may niche down to the point where it's no longer viable. But what a lot of people, especially business owners, don't realize that actually your number one role that you should be playing in your business first and foremost is in the form of marketing. Right. And when we talk about marketing, we're talking about doing things like defining what your brand stands for. We're talking about not just setting up a social media account, but you're talking about establishing your real estate, your brand real estate, setting up your website. Yes, social media pages are important, but I see a lot of people getting themselves in trouble when all they do is they rely on a social media page when they should be focusing on building their database of prospective and current clients that you can communicate to directly.
Yeah.
So it's
And then when
really
you
about
lose that
setting up.
social media page, the whole business mash up.
You see it all the time. You see people crying how Instagram take down them page and they don't know how to get in touch with their customers and they have to start from scratch. Or people who say, look, I have a great business. And when you look for them online, they have no website. They barely have a social media page that's putting along. And that really is where it starts. It starts with establishing your presence so that people, when they have that need, can they find you? Can they easily identify you as that business that can help them to solve the problem that they're trying to solve?
Let's get into some more of the mistakes. So you mentioned, I believe, one or two of them just now. You have a whole list of them that you want to go through. What are some other mistakes that small businesses make?
So, I mean, I've been actually going through a lot of them while I've been talking, so I'm just making sure I'm covering all of them. The other thing that I would say, Kalila, is that I find that a lot of small business owners don't recognize the importance of tapping into expertise, right? A lot of people feel, well, and this is a mistake that unfortunately a lot of small business owners make, is that, let's go back to the pan chicken example, right? So I cook a wicked pan chicken and I'm setting up my pan chicken stall and I'm going to specialize in barbecue chicken. What they don't realize is that not because you're a great cook or a great pan chicken griller means that you know how to run a business, right? There's so aspects to running a business. There's the accounting side, there's the risk management side, there's the compliance and regulatory side, even if you're not a financial institution. There's the marketing side, there's the sales side. And a lot of people don't realize that they're getting over their heads because they have a great product and their customers love the product. But as the business starts to grow and it's time to scale, they come out of their depth and unfortunately don't generate the consistent growth in revenue and profitability that they'd like to see because they literally just don't know how to do it. So my recommendation is that a lot of business owners need to start identifying where can they find expertise, whether it be a small accounting firm who can help them to get their accounts in order. Of course, read, connect with professionals. There are tons of marketing consultants and sales consultants and all sorts of people who offer these consulting services on the fly. I mean, I'm in marketing and yes, I work at JMB, but on the side, I speak to a lot of small business people who just need to run a marketing plan by me to get feedback. You know, it's so very important that you understand when you're out of your depth and get the help that you need.
Yeah, you know, a lot of small businesses try to expand too quickly without having the right systems in place. And I can't stress how important systems are. You mentioned, you know, accessing the expertise, making sure that you have an accountant. It doesn't have to be a full-time employee. You can outsource various elements of the business. How important is that structure and that planning when it comes to sustainable growth?
It's so very, very important, Kalila. And again, you know, the issue that you need to identify as a business owner is what's the structure that's going to work for your business, right? So, you know, we're still on the pan chicken example. Let's say I'm offering that pan chicken service and I want to add delivery to it, right? Adding a delivery component to the business is a completely different kettle of fish than just cooking the chicken and serving it to clients, right? So you literally have to know how to map out, well, what are the systems, the logistics I'm going to need? Am I going to have to buy a fleet of bikes or am I going to contract out the services to people who already own bikes? What does that cost structure look like and compare those? Inputs, ingredients, coal, equipment, staffing, all of those things people need to recognize what is crucial that needs to go into that business. And then ask yourself the question for the cost that it's going to cost me to input into these, into getting all of these things in place for the business to be able to be successful. The question is, do I have what I need to allow the systems to continue to operate? If I'm out of my depth, then maybe this is not the business for me, or maybe I need to bring on board the right talent, whatever it is. But it's so very, very important that you appreciate all of the moving parts that need to go into the business and how it can run successfully.
Absolutely. So from your perspective, Carrie-Ann, what is one growth mistake that may seem small at first, but can seriously affect your business over time?
For me, one of the things is that a lot of people need to recognize the importance of building that direct relationship with your clients, right? Mm-hmm. So in a few minutes ago, we would have spoken about people, first of all, relying on a platform like social media, Instagram, YouTube, as a way to reach their clients. And what they don't realize is things like direct marketing, which is your ability to be able to communicate directly to your clients or your prospective clients, is so very, very important. So from day one, start gathering information about your clients. You're getting their email addresses, get their mobile numbers, no matter what business you're in. I remember I was doing a workshop once with some micro business owners through quasi government organization, and she was actually just a fish vendor, and she just didn't think that direct marketing applied to her because she was selling fish. I said, but how do your customers know when you get a fresh batch or a fresh catch or you have some nice lobster? You have their numbers. Create a WhatsApp group so you can message them and say, boy, we're just getting in some fresh lobster, come in, or you have some nice snappers, or you're expanding into a new aspect of the business. You're offering a new product. Maybe somebody's bringing in some bami and, selling, you're having a special deal going on. The way that you can connect with your customers is gold. You don't leave it up to social media to determine that for you. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing is you're building relationships. So no matter what happens, you have a way to communicate with your clients, and your clients will stick with you and follow you because of it, because you have that relationship that's ongoing until whenever you decide you don't want to be in business anymore.
100%. I see some comments here. PCS says common SME mistakes are no business plan and not having proper bookkeeping system in place. Grow Your Wealth Conference says, I know someone who has had to rebuild their IG page 3 times. We've all heard those stories. Roswell says, I sell chicken full-time for a living. To make a profit, I do various pound weight, 4 pound, 4.5 pound, 5 pound, 5.5. It makes a huge difference in net sales on profit. And she says, I sell chicken on those pound weight because I have different customers with preference for the size they want. I like that term.
Psycho, as in psychology, psychographics. Sorry about that, guys. It's psychographics. Yeah.
All right, good. Well, Carrie Ann, the good thing is that over at JMMB, you guys have an SME unit that can
yes. So we have an SME relationship unit for those SMEs who need banking services and financial services, but we also have an SME resource center, which, as the name suggests, we provide resources for SMEs who need information, training, coaching, access to expertise to help them to run their businesses. So once you reach out to us, we'll be happy to connect you with that team, because we run workshops, virtual and in person. We have programs like the Accelerator program or Powerful Women in Business program, where people can apply to participate. And really, it's just about empowering small business owners to be the best at what they do. So absolutely reach out and we'll be happy to connect with you.
Perfect. So for those of you who are in business or thinking of starting a business, reach out to JMMB's SME unit. Thanks so much, Carrie Ann.
Thanks, Kalila.
We'll take our final break. Come back with your comments.
This segment of Taking Stock, The Analysts, was brought to you by JMMB Group, your best interest at heart.
Subscribe to my newsletter for money news like this straight to your inbox. Go to getmoneynews.com to sign up. The link is in my bio. Let's get this money.
Welcome back. Let me take a few of your comments before we wrap. Lavaine says, for all who are saying to sell or close Petrojam, you better hope that doesn't happen. The refinery volume is the only thing offsetting prices locally. Don't forget that. We've got Balanta, who says, remember that the drones and fighter jets plus the logistics of the multiple militaries will be consuming millions of barrels of oil potentially daily. Good point. And Balanta again says, so higher oil prices would be equivalent to higher interest rates as related to the consumer, or asking the question. Basilia says they recently drilled for core samples. They're being analyzed now in College Station, Texas. We'll know soon enough if the island will become a global player. Roswell says Jamaican's energy mix is good. I read news on a company setting up battery solar, like in St. Catherine. I believe that's a good move for us. And on that note, Rasheen says, with oil prices increasing, would alternatives provided by Wigton Energy be more attractive? Listen, alternatives are always attractive because oil can be quite volatile at times. And the alternatives are just better for the environment, better for the planet as well. So the world is moving towards alternative energy, maybe not as fast as we would like, but at the same time, oil is not going anywhere anytime soon. We're still heavy consumers of oil. So yeah, that's going to be our show for this evening. I think we had another, Javon. Javon says business is an art and should be treated as such. Absolutely. Yeah, make sure that you get help. Get help, guys. You don't have to do everything yourself, every single little thing. Have other people who specialize in different areas, and they can be contractors, they can be freelancers. You don't necessarily have to hire a full-time person for every single position. Just as needed, you can hire. And of course, check out JMMB's SME unit for any assistance, and their SME resource center for any assistance that you may need. So that's it for our show this week. Don't forget that you can get the Money Mission Workbook on Amazon and 7 Crave Marketplace. We're officially sold out at Fontana, so they're not at Fontana for now. But locally, you can get it at 7cravemarketplace.com, or just go to moneymissionja.com and you'll find all the links to Amazon, 7 Crave, and everything. So you can get it locally for delivery or internationally for delivery. Just go to moneymissionja.com. The link is in the description. Make sure as well that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with a friend, let them know what is going on, and that Taking Stock is the #1 place that we come to talk money in the Caribbean. Turn on the post notifications so that you don't miss anything that is coming. And we do have quite a bit coming in this week and next week. We want to help people learn more about money so we can all get this money together. If you want to connect with our analyst this week or our contributor this week, check out the description box below for the contact information. Thanks for joining us, guys. I'm Kalila. See you again next week.